Hi there, don't forget to click subscribe. This post was first published on creepypasta.org, Bu user Kal-El, Wyld Isle, Part 1. I don't know what actually caused it, or what the entity even was. All I know is that if I don't tell this story, I'm going to go crazy. I think it's best to just start at the beginning, and I'll allow you to make what you will out of these words. I don't expect many people to believe me. I mean, personally, I wouldn't believe it if I heard it from a stranger, but I know at least some, maybe even just 1 in 1,000 will believe what I have said. Those few are who this story is for, and knowing even one other person has experienced anything like this will at least give me a small amount of peace. Winter had been dragging in Maine. I lived in a small town that I won't name, but I will say it was very close to New Hampshire. I technically lived with my mom and dad, but they spent more time in their new home in Georgia at this point, so I basically lived alone. As a 22-year-old who had just finished college, it certainly didn't seem like the worst thing in the world. I didn't have a job yet, as for a while I was just focused on finishing school, and I was taking a bit of an extended break after. Like I said before, winter was still going strong in mid-March and I was getting incredibly bored. I had watched every movie on Netflix, and even went out and tried to hike in the snow as often as possible. After months of movies and walking in the cold, I was at the end of my rope. I hung out with friends sometimes, but I didn't have many who still lived nearby, as most had moved away after college. I planned to leave soon myself, more than likely within a year, and I wasn't too concerned about making any new friends here. One day I was watching a random movie on Netflix and glanced out the window, noticing it was starting to get dark out. I sighed and decided it was time for a change. I needed to do anything other than the same things I'd been doing since November. The early nights and gray days had caused me to be at my breaking point. Then it occurred to me, I still had a way too with a few games that my older brother had played more than I ever had. I didn't really like video games as much as I used to, but I figured desperate times called for desperate measures, and that anything was better than watching more Netflix. I went to the basement and found the box the W2 was in along with a couple games. None sounded that appealing, so I settled on one that I didn't even remember playing, called Wyld Isle, a game where you choose an animal avatar that lived on an island with other animal avatars that all seemed very friendly. It seemed like a blatant knockoff of Animal Crossing, but I figured it must be different in some way. I really didn't remember this game at all, but I figured maybe my brother had gotten it, as he bought most of the games back then anyway. I pretty much just picked it because it was the only option that I hadn't played thousands of times. I must say I did vaguely remember seeing some ads for it years ago, so I figured I might as well give it a shot. I turned on the game and chose the avatar of a rabbit with big eyes. I went to the island to start, and there were 6 other animals on it, which were a bird, a cow, a dog, a cat, a lizard, and a skunk, all of which had cartoonishly big heads and very cheery expressions. The heads of each avatar appeared on the side, showing the player how many there were. I began building my home and talking to the other animals. There wasn't that much to the game really, and it did seem a lot like a cheaper version of Animal Crossing. The island wasn't too big either, and there wasn't all that much to do, so after about an hour I decided to call it a day. I watched some more Netflix and then went to bed around 10. That night, a little after 3 in the morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. I got out of bed and walked around the house to double-check everything was fine, which it was. I glanced out the front window in my room down the street. The street had a house to the left about 100 feet away, with an intersection on the opposite side that was partially blocked by the house. There were another 2 houses on the right, the first of which was 150 feet to the side of my house, and the other was directly across from it. I was about ready to get back into bed when I noticed the very front of a car pull up to the corner past the house on the left. It was at the intersection and was mostly obstructed by my neighbor's house. I watched it for a second, as it was rare to see cars out at 3 a.m. here, and it seemed like it wasn't moving even though it had waited at the stop sign for longer than they'd need to. All I could see of the car was it was very low to the ground, red, and only about the first foot of it was visible. The car didn't move at all, and it made me feel weird, but realistically I figured there had to be a reason for it being there, and as it wasn't in front of my house, I decided to go back to bed. The next morning I woke up with a strange urge to play the Animal Crossing knockoff. I found this a bit odd because it wasn't anything special, but I figured I must really just be in this big of a need of something different to do. I went to the living room and slumped down on the couch in front of the TV. I turned the console on, and as soon as the game opened, I noticed something was very different. The island was no longer sunny, it was cloudy and dark for some reason. I figured it was the kind of game that would always be sunny, but maybe it mixed it up. It was sunny outside in Maine though, so it felt odd that the game was so dim and gray today. I walked around the island building some stuff and hoped the clouds would clear off, but they never did. The animals even seemed different than yesterday. They all seemed paranoid. I know that might sound crazy, but all of them acted like they couldn't talk to me for long and none approached me like yesterday. I borderline had to chase some down to even talk to them. I spoke to the cow for a very brief amount of time who just said, "I wish it was a nicer day, you should be careful," which seemed incredibly strange for one of the animals to say considering this is a game primarily targeted for kids. After about an hour again, I quit the game, and I had a weird feeling the rest of the day. The game was weird. I didn't get why it would be so glum and depressing, like what was the appeal there? I was confused, but after a while I pretty much stopped caring. The whole rest of the day though, I felt strange. It's hard to explain the kind of strange feeling, similar to the kind you get in the middle of the woods when you're completely alone and you haven't seen anyone else in hours. It just felt so bizarre, and I decided to not play the game anymore and went to bed around 10 just like last night. But I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned for a few hours until I finally passed out. I was awoken again around 3 a.m., and that feeling from earlier was way worse. I quickly checked the whole house and looked out all the windows again, except the one in my room, which was the only one with the view of the street out front. The backyard was completely surrounded by trees, and that always gave me an eerie feeling, but right now, that was not even close to my main concern. When I finally checked the front window, I noticed something odd to the left. My stomach dropped a bit when I saw the same car was there, and it was pulled out a bit farther than last night, but only a little so you could just see some of the hood. It was definitely an old red car, but other than that I still couldn't make anything out. I was kind of scared this time, as it was the same car within 100 feet of my house at about the exact same time as the night before. I didn't know how it could relate to me, but it just felt incredibly weird. I watched the car for probably 20 minutes, and when nothing changed, I went to bed. I didn't sleep much though, as I just kept trying to figure out what the deal was with the car and why I felt so paranoid all day. There didn't seem like there were many good ways to explain why the car would be there like that, 2 nights in a row, but I still assumed there had to be a normal explanation somehow. The next morning I felt awful. I was exhausted and the paranoia was still there. I didn't want to play the game again, but after a few hours of boring Netflix and still silence, I got curious and decided to give the game one more try. I wanted to see if it was still cloudy, and if the animals were still behaving strangely. I had nothing else to do, so why not right? I turned the game back on, and to my surprise it was still cloudy, and the animals were acting even stranger. But that wasn't it this time either. There was a new character. It took me a second to even realize, but there was another head that popped up on the side with the others. It looked like a goat, but it looked stranger than the other characters. Where the dog and cat, for example, had bright eyes and smiling faces, the goat had reddish eyes and a very uncomfortable smile. It actually creeped me out a bit, and I got an intense paranoid feeling. The smile looked weird, like the goat had something wrong with it. I thought that this game was messed up, and I questioned how anyone could make something like this for kids. I wanted to find the goat though, to see if the avatar was as weird looking as the head on the side was. I hoped that it wasn't, and that I was just creeping myself out for no reason. As I walked around, though I couldn't find him, I tried to see if I could figure out anything by talking to the animals, but none of them wanted to say a word. The only one I talked to was the cat, who told me simply, "Run," which was deeply unsettling. The cat was also taken away from me by the cow, who seemed to be scolding him. This was so weird. I couldn't even figure out what was going on. I quickly turned the game off as I truly felt creeped out. I didn't see the actual goat, but I don't think I even really wanted to. I spent the rest of the day in a paranoid mess, wondering if I should go to one of my 3 remaining friends' houses for a bit, but a sudden heavy snowstorm made me reconsider. As night fell and the thick snow continued, I thought about going to bed even though it was only 9. I was so tired from the night before, and a day's worth of anxiety blended with that was enough of a mix to make my eyes really heavy. I laid down and fell asleep in a matter of minutes. My worst fear happened though as I woke up and glanced at my alarm clock to see that it was 3:13. The same time it had been every time I had been awoken. I skipped the house search and went straight to the window in my room. I took a step back as the snow was still coming down heavily, and it startled me at first. I glanced down the road and thought I was relieved as there was so much snow. I didn't see anything, but after a double take my heart almost stopped. The car was there, in the same spot, except it was pulled out even farther than the first 2 nights, and now the front window was visible. The snow in my line of sight almost seemed to stop right at the perfect time, as it literally looked like someone with horns was sitting in the front seat. I quickly shut the blinds and sat down. There was no way the person had horns. I had to have been mistaken with all the snow. Even though I couldn't piece together what it could have been, I knew it couldn't be that. I dared to look out again and saw it was still there, and even more so, it really did look like horns. To my absolute horror, it didn't even look like a person, more like an animal. Actually, it looked like the goat from the game, and it was staring right at me. Like if the goat somehow looked like how it would in real life, if something that insane could exist. I quickly shut the blinds and started panicking. I tried to deny what I had just seen, but I knew what it was. It was the goat from the game. I'd bet anything on it. It's an insane feeling to accept something that seems impossible. But when you know it's not anything normal, you have to realize the truth.